What's going on, YouTube? We're back at it for another video, and today we've got a bit of a special one. We're back at it with the Minions on Necro, and we're throwing the Thorns back on. We've got the Minions Thorns 2.0 build. Back before the first season launched, I tried this one out, and effectively all I wanted to do was make it to where all of my minions, since they could inherit my Thorns, basically just use them as punching bags, and see if that would end up killing a lot of enemies. Well, you know, it worked fairly decently back then, but it wasn't something that would end up being overkill or be able to push into nightmare dungeons. Well, turn around for Season 3 of Diablo 4, and I built it back out, and next thing you know, well, they've improved minions quite a bit. Golem is doing quite a bit of damage, and you'll notice from the gameplay footage that I've overlaid over all of this talking portion in the intro, it's definitely tearing through some content, and I would argue it could even make it up to tier 100 if you can get your character's survivability up. That is the one issue that I have with this. Just about every bit of the end-game content I have already cleared through. We went through Duriel, slapped him around. We went through Gregor, and he really got torn down. Barshan didn't slap around too much, so he ended up taking a little bit longer, but over some time after he whipped his little tails or whatever they are, he ended up falling to him as well. And my crown jewel moment was destroying old Malthus over in the vaults with these minions just using the Thorns. Specifically, the only amount of damage I can possibly do with my character is through the basic skill Hemorrhage or popping Land of the Dead, which, trust me, is not really doing a whole lot of damage. It's just another one of those things that can help out in boss fights to possibly spawn some, some of your minions back in or something along those lines, and just help out in certain moments when there's certain enemy types that just either don't attack or don't attack all that often. That was one of the number one issues back before Season 1 when I tried this out. The minions just weren't strong enough. They just didn't have the capability of pretty much taking down any enemy that just didn't attack when they have Thorns. Even with the Paragon board, they just felt extremely weak. It was unbelievably slow, but now they're actually a bit efficient. They're getting some advantages from the Paragon board, which we'll talk about here in a bit. But at the same time, they are pushing through all this content, and you just have to basically lead them like a, sled dog, and it's pretty much the sky's the limit. The only issue that I've had with this build is, sadly enough, Uber Lilith doesn't seem like you can get it done, at least with the fashion of how I wanted to get this Minions build done, considering they just won't aggro on the Blood Blisters. That's literally the only issue. They're definitely dishing out the Thorns damage. It is hurting Uber Lilith, but I just can't get them to aggro on the Blood Blisters, and I'll need to have to, effectively, you could probably get it done still with the build. You just need to add something in for your character to be able to deal enough damage to take down Blood Blisters, and then the rest of the content could easily be taken down. These minions are extremely strong, it's ridiculous, but we've got a lot of things to cover with this one, so let's get into the gear. Alright, when it comes to gear, I'm going to try and run through this fairly quickly. We're going to just basically go down the list of all the pieces of gear that we have with the legendary aspects, as I know there's a lot of people that just basically want to plug and play and then just roll back in and, kind of feel it out for themselves. But that being said, let's start off with a helmet. We've got the Occult Minion, just going to increase our skeletal mages by 2. Number one things we want to roll on this is going to be total armor and resistances, just trying to increase overall survivability. Moving over to the chest plates, it's going to be the main piece, the meat of the whole build, if you will, the Razor Plate. Now, sadly enough, I've got a low roll on this of 12,000. You can farm Xur for this. If you don't know who Xur is, effectively just go out, complete Legion events, complete World Boss events, you'll get Vials of Blood, and then you'll be able to head over to the map, and you'll just look at this little spot over here called the Darkened Way, over here next to Yelsna, and you'll just roll in there and go up to an altar, and effectively you'll spawn this guy in and be able to farm this Razor Plate at him. I say farm it, but sadly enough, I've only gotten one from this guy, and trust me, I'm still mad about it, but at least in under 10 tries, I was able to get this at least one time from him, so if you're looking for a way to get Razor Plate a little bit easier, or just one of those odds to kind of gamble for it, that's the best bet for you. And trust me, 12,000 is really all you need, but trust me, I'd love to have that 16,000 just for absolute melting power with Thorns. But moving over to our gloves, we've got the Frenzied Dead. This is just going to further increase the attack speed of our minions, which inherently, due to the changes from the Paragon board, which we'll get into a little bit later, this gives them more multiplicative damage. Number one things that we're going to be looking for, or just the one thing, is Minion inherits your Thorns. We want that at a max roll. It's literally all we're looking for. Anything else, I'm just not even certain what's actually increasing the amount of damage for Thorns. So whatever else is on there, you know, possibly strength, damage to injured enemies. I don't know whether or not these infect them, but strength is going to help us with survivability as it just further increases our overall armor. But moving on to the pants, we've got Hardened Bones, giving our minions a little bit more survivability by a damage reduction of 20%. Honestly, I'm not sure if they actually need this, but it is something that's going to help them just take more hits and dish out more Thorns. The number one rolls that we want on this are Total Armor and Thorns. Anything else, just damage reduction, but absolutely at a must, we want Total Armor for survivability, and obviously more Thorns is just more damage with more clearing power. Thankfully, I got a max roll on this. I actually got it from Duriel farming. So any of those moments you see yellows or legendaries coming from Duriel, do keep an eye out for those Thorns. You got to look out for it. But that, moving on to boots, we've got Hulking aspect, which this legendary aspect was probably the one aspect in the game where I was like, you know, I don't think I'll ever use this. It's absolutely garbage. Who in their right mind would ever try this? Turns out that 10% chance procs a lot more often than I thought, and one of the main aspects to dealing Thorns damage is through our Golem's cooldown, which with the Bone Golem actually taunts all the enemies near him. Wherever the selected location of your cursor you choose to cause him to taunt, it's absolutely devastating. He has a massive AoE radius to taunt these enemies in as well, and they'll just dogpile on him and immediately just start folding over him from just striking him. And it can be life-saving in certain moments when there are certain elite enemies that basically bypass your minions, go for you. This is a way to guarantee you're getting that minion to basically take the aggro from you and deal massive amounts of Thorns damage. And this procs way more often, and the corpses can help with just healing the, minions. But the number one thing is just the cooldown for his actual ability. It's unbelievably useful. I couldn't believe it. I legitimately thought this was one of those aspects they needed to just either take out or rework, but it works fantastic for this build. I'd almost say it's a must-have. But that being said, when it comes to boots, we need movement speed and resistances. Number one reason for resistances is the simple fact that we want to slot in more of those skulls in our jewelry to have more armor for higher survivability inside of those higher nightmare dungeons. But moving on to our main hand weapon, I would highly suggest a scythe, as it basically does nothing for us. I'm going to be honest. I mean, we're just using hemorrhage right now. Basic skill damage is doing basically nothing. So life on kill from a scythe is actually going to be beneficial for us for just survivability. And all stats gives us even more strength, which gives us even more armor and more survivability in turn. Now I do have Needle Flare on this, which before Season 1, it was not proccing, it was not working. This aspect was pretty much like dead in the water, almost like Edge Masters for a moment. But thankfully, now it does proc. I've had several moments where I've seen one enemy either hit me or just seen a group of enemies around me that were not striking anything, ended up just literally crumbling because this ended up proccing, and I think it double dips on damage in the moment where, say, you get hit, that person takes the Thorns damage they just did the hit with, and then if this procs, it'll do another amount of Thorns damage on top of that to them at the same point. So I'm not even certain whether or not this actually can happen with the minions themselves, but if you're close to the minions, it's going to work in that way, and it's going to be fantastic. Considering we have so many minions right now, it has that 40% chance to proc, so each one of them could end up multi-procking this. Could be absolutely devastating. If I put this on the necklace, I would probably have a 60% chance. I'm thinking about it right now, maybe testing it a little bit later, but it's something to think about. But we need to move on and get the rest of these aspects out there. And when it comes to the shield, I've got the Shield of Might on here. This is going to give me a little bit more of damage reduction for survivability. It's, you know, it's something I might slot out later. I might change this to Juggernaut. I'm not 100% certain right now. But I know for right now, this works. It does push into 90s. It does give me the survivability I want, but I'm not sure whether or not trading off for Juggernaut might be the better option later on, considering I just need to find boots with more evade to them to compensate for that 100% increase to the cooldown of my evade, because you will need that in order to survive higher tier nightmare dungeons, especially in moments where there's some enemies that just bypass your minions. You need to make sure you have some way to kind of get yourself out of those moments, considering Necro's terrible when it comes to movement speed, and I just can't stand it myself. But when it comes to the rolls that we want on the shield, we want Thorns, and Minions inherit Thorns. Literally, those two rolls. Honestly, you know, I've got 2 rolls of Thorns on this. You know, I'd highly suggest finding one that has that, you know, static status of, or static stat of Thorns on it. But I don't know whether or not you truly need the second one, and if you truly did get a 16,000 razor plate, you don't need it. Trust me, you're going to have more than enough, even though, you know, me personally, I'd love to have all the Thorns. I want all of them. I just want that absolute melting power, which it definitely has right now. But the number one thing is those minions inheriting the Thorns and just giving yourself a little bit more survivability. I mean, you'll notice I have an even more basic skill damage with this. It's not doing anything. It's a joke. Hemorrhage is just fortifying me and giving me more survivability. But moving on to the jewelry, we've got Blood Eater's Choker. This one's going to further increase the number of skeletal warriors we have by 3. The number one reason for this is we're using the defenders, which increases their actual inherited thorns to 50%. So having another 3, it's just 3 more chances for even more thorns damage down the line. And especially with something like Rigor, you may have seen from the gameplay footage earlier, it melts them pretty quickly when they just cleave through all of them. But when it comes to the necklace, I did have one that had 1,200 thorns on it. I had to throw that one to the side, considering I needed more survivability. The number one thing we need on this is total armor. Everything else can be like, you know, arguably you'd want damage reduction, but total armor is the number one thing we need with this, just to have that increase to overall survivability. You need to be closing into that 13,000 mark in order to make it into the 90 plus with the Nightmare Dungeons. Especially with Necro, because we're just squishy, terrible movement, nothing when it comes... You know, Blood Mist is just... It's great, but it's slow to proc. It's one of those moments where it takes a second to even go into Blood Mist. You can get caught in the animation and still die. There's just so many things that can just end up going wrong with Necro that giving yourself the overall survivability is an utmost need when it comes to Necro. And pushing into those, you know, closing in on Nightmare 100. But that being said, you know, damage reduction and total armor are really all you need. I wish I could get more thorns on it. I've been trying to roll. I've basically burnt so much money, and I burnt myself through Veiled Crystals all the way down. I ran out of Veiled Crystal before I ran out of Forgotten Souls, which is unreal to me, but that's a story for a different day. That's a gambling problem. I love it. But moving on to the ring, I'm going to state up front. We basically only need Minions inherit Thorns on these. Maximum life for yourself is probably the number one thing besides the Minions inherit Thorns. Sadly enough, I didn't get a max roll on either one of the rings, but I've only got one rolled with maximum minion life, and I still don't know whether or not they actually truly need that. I mean, after going through the Paragon board, they have so much survivability, they have so much armor, so much resistances. They are doing just fine in 90s. I'm the one that gets one shot, so at the end of the day, I think it's better off increasing your overall maximum life instead of theirs. That's just where I'm going to lay that. But with the first legendary aspect for this ring, we've got Unyielding, which is going to increase our minions' attack speed and damage reduction anytime we use Army of the Dead, which is really useful, especially in boss fight moments. But it's a double dip of the damage. Effectively is one of those moments where they can take more hits and deal more thorns, and at the same time they're getting that multiplicative damage increase from just having a higher attack speed. But moving on to the next ring, we've got Circle of Reanimation, and this is just something that's going to give them even more multiplicative damage based on being alive for a long time. And trust me, even in an 86, I've had skeletal warriors, my golem, basically survive almost the entire dungeon. It's easy to keep them alive for longer than 10 seconds. They are constantly going to have this active, and even with skeletal mages that end up taking their own life force to deal damage, we're going to be able to pop so many of these corpses with skeletal priests that they don't even die. They're just going to have like that maximum 40% multiplicative on top of this 40% multiplicative. It you know, you would think it would be dealing crazy amounts of damage, but it's not as crazy. It in a way, you know, when you're facing off with the same level as yourself, yeah, they're melting. But when it comes to pushing into like 150 level enemies, you'll notice the damage drop off is quite astounding, or quite ridiculous, and the amount of damage from Thorns is unreal. That's the thing that's really given that melting power, while their damage by themselves is more of a little bit of like a slow trickle down, if you will. I'd almost say it's like a third of what you've seen from the firewall sorcerers out there. That's about where I'd kind of put it when it comes to the amount of damage when all of them at one time are focusing on one enemy at a level 150. Now, when it comes to possible changes I would make with some of the pieces of gear, I would possibly put Needle Flare on the necklace and take away just one of the Skeletal Warriors. That way I could have a higher proccing chance. I think it goes up to 60 for Thorns damage to deal damage to all the enemies around me. You know, I already talked about the Juggernaut on the shield. If I had some boots with probably like 3 different evades, I might want to put that on there just to give myself a substantial amount of armor. And when it comes to my helmet, Skeletal Mages aren't really the meat of the Thorns damage. They're generally off at a distance, kind of throwing their bones in, attacking from a distance in general. So I would say taking away the 2 Skeletal Mages and trading out for something like Disobedience, which just gives us even more of that stacking percentage of armor on top of ourselves, might be a bit of a better bet for pushing in towards that Nightmare tier 100 with this build and giving ourselves overall survivability. But that's some of the things I've thought about changing, or maybe even just gaining a little bit more damage by throwing something like Frenzied Dead over onto the necklace just to have a higher percentage of that attack speed. Maybe that'll help. If you're looking for something that's a bit more damage from the minions themselves instead of just the thorns from the minions, that'd be a way that you could kind of alleviate that, or increase that, if I will. But now let's move over into the skill tree. And when it comes to the skill tree, we'll run through this fairly quickly. Obviously, we're moving with Hemorrhage, and we're going all the way to Innate's Hemorrhage. That way, we're gaining Fortify every time we attack with it, just giving ourselves even more survivability. Moving over into the core skills, we're doing just Hewed Flesh. We're just going to make sure we have the possibility to create corpses anytime that we attack. We're really going to need this, considering we need to be able to heal our minions or just gain more minions at the end of the day in boss fights. Malphus is probably the number one that this is actually going to be beneficial for, even though for whatever reason there seems like there might be a bug with him. If you look at the gameplay footage, I'll have a video up separately of just the Malphus fight. It's weird how like sometimes his little altars get these spawns for the corpses after he's already destroyed it. I don't know. It's a little bit strange, but something key highlight for the devs maybe. Coming up next, we need Blood Mist. We only need 1 point to do it, but we need to make sure that anytime we hit Blood Mist, we're spawning in corpses. Just going to be even more helpful for us. Obviously, 3 points into the Thorns, we're getting another 2,300 off of this, just further increasing that DPS. And Skeletal Warrior Mastery, just further increasing their damage and life. Moving on over, we're going to make sure we have Iron Maiden, which this is going to be a little bit more damage on top of it. And I did put Horrid Iron Maiden. That way the damage is increased by a 30% multiplicative. Not sure whether or not this is like a huge amount. I did at the beginning utilize this with 4 points from my helmet and then another 3 points from the necklace for curse skills. And I mean, honestly, after changing it over, I haven't really noticed a huge difference in damage, but I definitely just did this to make sure that we have an increased overall damage done from any enemy just attacking the minions. Now, you could go for the Aberrant Iron Maiden, which is actually going to heal you every time one of these enemy dies. I haven't tried this personally, but it may be something a little bit better for your overall survivability, considering, you know, with Hemorrhage, we're not gaining life back, we're just gaining Fortify, so you're going to have to utilize potions to kind of alleviate those moments when you do take dips of damage in your health. But beyond that, Death's Embrace, really, we're just doing this just to have a little bit more damage reduction from close enemies. I did amplify damage just to basically have an increased amount of multiplicative damage towards cursed enemies, because I'm not sure whether or not this is actually affecting Thorns or not. This may be giving it a 12% multiplicative increase, but I figured why not just try it. And I mean, it's been working so far, and there's really not a whole lot else I can really put these points into beyond that, other than possibly going for Fueled by Death, but I'm still not certain whether or not that's actually increasing the overall damage. But for right now, it's doing just fine. Obviously, Skeletal Mage Mastery, as we're just going to increase the damage and life of our skeletons. Over here, coming to the kind kind of blood aspects. Gruesome Mending, we're going to increase overall healing from all sources by 30%. I think this also affects the Skeletal Priest's healing of the minions. I remember at one point this was something that did state, or one of these was stating that it also increased the healing of minions. So I wonder whether or not the rewording on this is possibly still doing that action, but overall, the Skeletal Priests are doing their job perfectly. Over on the right, Transfusion, just to possibly get some blood orbs, a little bit more of that health back from those moments when we're utilizing Hemorrhage. It could just be something for overall survivability. On the left, you know, we're just going to put 1 point in coalesced blood, or coal-seeded, whatever you want to say it. That's just going to give us a little bit more damage while we're healthy, but the reality is we're just going for Drain Vitality to make sure that we're getting possible more fortification from each time we're using Hemorrhage. And then we've got Necrotic Carapace, which is just basically giving us a bit more fortified from any time that one of our minions is basically dropping a corpse, which will happen quite often from the Golem itself and sometimes from the Skeletal Mages if you're utilizing that one that fortifies you. But any other time that we're creating a corpse from like Blood Mist or something along those lines, it's just even more fortified for us. Now going on down to our left, obviously Golem Mastery, we'll want that so we can get the damage and life up on our Golem. We've got Army of the Dead all the way stacked through. That way we're going to raise our skeletons and skeletal mages and warriors anytime that we may be in a boss fight. Malphus in particular, he can end up killing quite a few of the skeletons, and Army of the Dead can be a really nice refreshing point where you can get all those minions back instead of having to wait for one of his little totems to die and have a massive amount of corpses around it. Those are one of the few times. Generally the skeletal mages will be the ones to die in that first, considering they'll just be off on their own and it's hard to kind of get corpses in that fight. But beyond that, it's doing the work that we need, and it can help in clearing some of those enemies that just don't attack all that often or just don't attack at all, considering we do get those explosives from that, from the, volatile corpses going around. But down here, Inspiring Leader, that way we can gain that attack speed for our minions. At the same time, we want Hellbent Commander, increasing their overall damage while we're close to them. We want Death's Defense, that way they've got increased armor and increased resistances. It's going to be substantially noticeable. And at the same time, we want Bonded in Essence, that way every time that we're consuming one of those corpses with the Skeletal Priest, they're getting their maximum amount of that life back, healing from those moments. And crazy enough, I did end up going with Callan's Etiquette, which I guess effectively it's given them another 30% right now when it comes to attack speed. There are a lot of moments where I don't take damage for more than 2 seconds. They're just kind of like eating all that damage up there, so it is noticeable. It does take effect. Honestly, it's the only point that I would take from down here, considering I just have no reason to even use Rothma's Vigor or Ossified Essence or the Shadow Blight. There's just no reason, so we're going full minion on this one with the Callan's Etiquette, and it is working quite well. Now let's talk about the Book of the Dead real quick. Skeletal Warriors, I'm going with the Defenders, and we're going with the increased amount of Thorns on these. That way we're just maximizing that Thorns damage dealt. Moving over to the Skeletal Mages, I have decided that I went with the Bone on the reduced life one, so that way, or after being alive for 5 seconds, they're getting a 40% multiplicative damage increase, which, trust me, it is very easy to keep these Skeletal Mages alive. We're going to be popping corpses all over the place. When there is like a ton of bodies everywhere, they like never die. And with that other one where they're alive for 10 seconds, another 40% multiplicative, it's pretty noticeable with the damage. They're going to be really kind of chunking away in a way, you know, not big chunky, but little chunky. They'll start dwindling those enemies pretty quickly. Now, when it comes to the Golem, utmost importance, the Bone one, because of its capability of utilizing the Taunt, that passive, you know, where active, he becomes unstoppable and he taunts nearby enemies and takes 30% reduced damage on top of that. So it's like he's just able to tank it. It gains 70% of its armor as Thorns for the duration. I mean, it's insane. It's insane. It's beautiful for this build. It's devastating when those moments when they just all jump up and just attack him and then just get melted. And on top of that, with Bone, we're able to increase his maximum life and increase his Thorns to 50% on top of that. So it's blowing it out of the, water. It's unbelievable. Now let's move over to the Paragon board. Starting off on the first little bit, I did 20% damage. I'm still not sure about this right side. I did come up over to this right portion to get this prime node, but I believe the maximum life and resistance to all is actually going to do us better. And then I went up over here, my first glyph socket, I put in the warrior one. That way I could gain the armor increase, not even the damage for skeletal warriors, just armor. Because honestly, at this point right now, like they're not doing, skeletal warriors are doing some damage, but they're not doing like crazy amounts of damage. The big thing is just creating more survivability for them. But moving up over to the right, I went and made sure that I got all the armor for myself. That way I can just make sure that I've got a bit more survivability. Over on the left side, I guess we could do 20% more damage, but I don't know whether or not that's increasing our overall Thorns damage. Maybe you could try that yourself, but personally I just wanted more skill points to move into the next Paragon board. Which our first Paragon board that we're going to attach, I went with the Cult Leader. That is when your minions deal 10% increased damage for each 20% of the attack speed bonus. This is a new change that they made for this season, I believe, and you know, it's noticeable. I'm going to say it's noticeable. Is it making them overpowered? Is it making them amazing? I wouldn't say that necessarily, but it's making it amazing with the Thorns and giving them the capability to actually have stopping power, because I will say, previous to Season 1, they were absolutely garbage. I completely upgraded them to the point where they should be dealing damage, and they were just doing nothing towards those enemies that just couldn't attack, and Thorns had to do everything for them. Whereas now, they have some capability. But from this point, I immediately went in and over to the left, made sure that I got the minions armor and maximum life first. That way we're getting survivability for them, and then getting Cult Leader for a little bit more damage for themselves. Going over down to the right, we've got more skeletal warrior armor and damage for them. Damage is kind of noticeable, I guess, but the big thing is about the armor. We're getting survivability for them. Moving up over here, we've got more minion damage and minion attack speed, just giving them a little bit more of that DPS output. But heading over here to the left, making sure that we get minion resistance to all elements. That way we're getting more survivability for the minions. And then heading over to the right, I've got my next glyph socket, which is exhumation. This one, the big thing about this, since we're consuming corpses all the time, this is more for my survivability, so that every time I consume a corpse, I've got another aspect of gaining Fortify, but also gaining damage reduction from this, just further increasing my own survivability. You could put in something else that's possibly for like the Golem or something beyond that that just gives them more damage, but for me personally, when it comes to pushing into those like 90s of Nightmare Dungeons, I needed the survivability. But pushing over to the right, we're going to make sure that we get the damage reduction for the minions over here on the right. Got to have that to give them more survivability. And just north of that, more minion damage and somehow some corpse kill damage, but I think that's just from the glyph itself. But minion damage to just give them a little bit more. Moving over to the left and then up onto the next Paragon board, we've got the Golem board. If this would just scroll out, I swear this Death Adder is like... that mouse scroll wheel is just dying. But over here we are maxing out our Golem's capability, which I will say the Golem is substantially more noticeable when it comes to damage. Like, he's dishing it out. He can kill Bloodlusters. Like, that guy is killing it. He actually has quite a substantial amount of damage, and I am very impressed by the Golem overall right now. Not only is he like the main guy that's just dishing out those thorns, but at the same time, like, he really is swinging with some heavy hits if you really amplify him up. And I don't even have him at the maximum right now. There's another glyph socket that can give him even more multiplicative damage, and it is actually noticeable. Like, he's chunking away at some life on some of these enemies. But that being said, we come in, head over to the left first and gain that Golem armor. That way we've got survivability with him, and then push up over to get the hulking monstrosity. Not only is it going to give him more maximum life, but he's going to deal a little bit more damage. Heading over to the right, we're going to make sure that we've got that total armor for our Golem. This is something that's also going to affect the amount of thorns, so keep that in mind. And then pushing up over to the right, we've got more Golem damage, and then we'll be able to get the glyph socket over here, which I put in Mage. That way, minions gain increased resistance to all elements. This is not just for skeletal mages, this is for all minions with this one glyph socket, once you have that 40 intelligence right there. But over to our left, we'll want to make sure we grab the Miscreation over here. That's going to give us even more of that Golem's armor for survivability, and then over to the right for more Golem attack speed and damage. As I will say, you do want these nodes, considering he is dealing some fairly decent damage, so this is something that's noticeable for him. But from that point, we'll head back over to the left with Flesh Horror, move up to the left all the way to the top to make sure we get more of the Golem's maximum life. The Golem's damage is nice, but the maximum life for his survivability is even more important. Now, this is where things get to the point where I can make an argument for two different aspects. I chose to try out Flesh Eater, which, since we're consuming corpses all the time, why not try to get that 40% multiplicative increased damage? I don't know whether or not it's affecting Thorns or not, but honestly, you could end up trading this out for the Scent of Death, where at least 2 corpses nearby, you gain 15% damage reduction, and with no corpses, it's 15% increased damage. Honestly, I might actually consider Scent of Death to be more beneficial for you. That one might be better off. Honestly, I'm not seeing a whole crazy increase of damage from Flesh Eater. I just tried it just to see whether or not, but I'd honestly say Scent of Death is probably going to be a better bet. I'd arguably try to change this one. I may test it out a little bit later, but I'm just going to put it in here right now, as I just wanted to get this video out for people out there, as it's working just fine with how it is right now, but definitely consider Scent of Death over Flesh Eater, in my opinion. But I moved into this one, kind of took some points over here just to grab up Flesh Eater, and the big reason for this last Paragon board was for me to just have another glyph socket, and this one was for my Undaunted to gain 10% damage reduction while I'm fortified. That was the big reason to just have this glyph over here, and specifically just to create more survivability with myself, considering I've got so many different things that are giving me fortify. I'm constantly fully fortified, so I need a little bit more of that survivability by having this damage reduction. And I tried coming around the other corner with damage to elites. I don't know whether or not that's actually going to be something that would increase the overall damage for or damage towards the Thorns. Goodness, I'm losing my train of thought here. But I'm not sure whether or not that's going to be more beneficial. But arguably, the Scent of Death skill board may be the better option for you. I haven't really mapped it out to see whether or not I could actually get another glyph socket along with Scent of Death, but it's definitely worth trying just to get that increase to survivability, because an additional 15% right now would be substantial, and you're always pretty much going to have 2 corpses nearby with this type of build when running through Nightmare Dungeons. Like, there's bodies everywhere, and you won't even be able to consume them fast enough. There's some moments where there's so many bodies, you'll see bodies on the ground, but they're despawning because there's so many more coming up. It's unreal. Like, you'll be trying to right click on that and it just isn't working. You're frustrated, and it's just the game not being able to keep up with how many corpses are dropping. But that's going to be the Paragon board right there, guys. Pretty much going to be the whole build. It's a solid one. It's a killer. We'll get into a little bit of gameplay here. I'll just showcase like the later half of an 86, where I'm just able to comfortably push through and kind of just showcase the build itself, kind of give you a little bit of a rundown on how I play it, considering it's fairly simple, but if you don't know what's going on, it's just a bit easier if I just run you through it. But let's jump into that real quick. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, well, we're in a Vault 86 over here at the Vault of Ink. Just to get this gameplay footage out there, not try to make it too long, we'll just try to clear the, basically from the point that you enter the vault. It's a pretty short experience, but give you the rundown on how to utilize this build. So we're going to run in, we're going to have the Golem go in, and then we're just going to start cursing from this point. And then we want to kind of make sure that we're consuming some of those corpses. You'll notice the skeletal mages are having a little bit of their life taken away, but we're easily able to just maintain their life over time. Grab up about 30 of those. Make sure that the Golem taunts everything. Put those curses down. That way we're getting the maximum amount of damage. Then we'll notice, oh, this is a good one. I wish I could get some action. Trying to avoid the poison though. That's still going to end up killing me in the long run. We'll consume some corpses to maintain the survivability. But we'll get him to taunt again. Keep cursing. Kind of have to hang back, sadly enough. It's like basically our playstyle the whole time. But you'll notice everything's dying, even though I can't get close enough right now without getting myself killed. We'll have another one of those moments where we'll just watch this take one strike and then instantly killed. Like the rest of his life right there. As soon as he attacks him. And then we're able to move forward. Death Pulse is not ideal, I'll be real. I wish I could have gotten a better modifier than this. It is going to force me to kind of play around this garbage. I hate some of these modifiers, but in the higher tiers, it feels a little bit cheap that they almost feel like they're one-shot, even though I've got 13,000 armor and 13,000 health right now and maximum resistances. So it's, you know, it's one of those things I would wish to be kind of like capped at the amount of damage they can actually deal. Like, I wish they would do like a 55 or 75% of my life instead of like, oh, hey, there's like 100% of your life gone with one death pulse. Well, we'll get him to taunt, and then you can see, as soon as we taunt, right there, it's just almost instantly everything around him just getting melted. Even at 86, I'm still having moments, though, where I almost get one shot. I could use more armor. It would be nice. But that's why I've gotten so much survivability on this, but you'll notice, as soon as I send him in to just taunt, that aggro just instantly almost gets them killed every single time. We'll drop a little Land of the Dead on this moment just to give them a little bit more of that attack speed and damage. Trying to make sure that I'm not getting stuck. But you'll notice this is one of those moments where I say the skeletal mages aren't the greatest when it comes to their overall damage. Like, it's much better based on the fact when they're dealing the Thorns damage. But we're going to have one of those moments where we're just kind of maintaining our survivability here. You know, this enemy, there's one of them that just doesn't attack all that often. I really hate them. Like, they basically just spawn things in. This is one of, like, the #1 issues. Like, you can see that their damage isn't the greatest in this moment. But it's because that enemy just doesn't attack. It's really frustrating. So we do the aggro. You notice he still doesn't attack. We're just kind of, like, waiting for that thing to die. Grab up some of these. I need some more veiled crystals, so I'm almost out. Hey, here's a good decent amount of enemies right here. We'll get him to aggro everything. They'll just start melting. Maintain corpses. That comes into swing. Sadly, it didn't hit any of our minions. But then, as soon as it hits them, boom, dead. That's pretty much the whole playstyle. We're just walking around, coming into each room, having them aggro everything, instantly getting them killed. Coming in, cursing everything to make sure that it's got more damage. You know, Land of the Dead just for a little bit of that flair and excitement moment. Considering we're gonna have a long cooldown with it anyways, might as well use it as many times as we can for the fun. And then just move forward. Heading into the next room. This one's actually an interesting one. We will actually get Thorns damage towards this when these get struck. It's not proccing right now because there's not anything really close. But let's wait for the next time around. You will notice once it procs again, there it goes. If I can get them close enough, you'll notice it does take the Thorn damage right there. Sadly enough, we're not getting like a big chunky addition right now. So it is kind of irritating, but if I get close and I wait for that next one, it should insta-kill it, like right there. Kind of a little bit irritating in moments like that, but considering it still can take Thorns damage, it is nice, so it does help with the fact that, you know, we don't have moments where we're basically stumped. You know, we're basically wasting another 15 minutes on a dungeon because there's some inanimate object not taking Thorns damage. Thankfully, it is still reversing the damage. Ooh, getting a little bit dangerous right there. Let's pop some Land of the Dead real quick. Get the aggro going. Some of these constructs, especially those scorpion ones, can basically one-shot that, like, scorpion tail poison thing. Like, I swear, I get hit from off-screen with that quite often from elites, and it just instant kills me, and I hate it. I cannot stand that moment. I just walked into a death pulse. That's on me. Well, that's fun. All right, let's walk back in there. You know, we got to get some of these bodies back up. We got to make sure he aggro's again. Goodness, some of these moments, it's absolutely frustrating. And I hate these snakes, you know, we're just getting a bad pool with what the enemy type is right here. We're gonna send him in to get that aggro again. And hopefully this time it'll do a little bit better. But it's have to keep moving and make sure that we're not taking a majority of the damage. And then in 2 seconds, it's about to proc. We'll be able to get him to aggro everything. You'll see the radius on that is quite substantial. Then we'll make sure we're cursing everything. But you'll notice, as soon as this thing attacks, it's going to have this nice chunky amount of Thorns damage. Let me see if I can get the aggro for him to get it. And maybe another one of those moments where he's just spitting out. One of these does like this like burst attack of different stuff. I guess this is not one of them. This one just kind of like spawns things in. You notice the other one keeps doing the wind chill thing. And this is one of the moments where it's like frustrating in a vault. If you're going through regular nightmare dungeons, you don't really have to deal with this. There's like a few enemy types that won't attack all that much, but thankfully like the minions do have enough damage now to where they can dwindle this thing. Maybe damage to injured enemies is the better bet. You know, honestly, that seemed like one of those moments where it really substantially increased because it was injured. But thankfully it doesn't take too long to take those down with just the minions themselves. Then we'll aggro everything, we'll start cursing everything, and this one should be pretty quickly. We'll make sure that we go into Blood Mist real quick while they're getting the work done. There's quite a few different things popping around. He's gonna aggro again. And I think, we've got another one of those enemies, I think, that's just not attacking. You'll notice that just went down pretty quickly. But now we're basically just kind of waiting on this guy to die. And we're taking some hits. Kind of aggro. But thankfully, with that increased attack speed, you'll notice they are dealing quite a bit of damage right now. Wish I had some more corpses. Kind of keep those mages alive a little bit longer, but it should do pretty much fine. So we'll keep on moving. Now we should be getting close to the end of the vault. We'll just come over here to the left, get him to aggro everything, curse it, and then start just consuming some corpses. Now, barriers are really going to be one of the annoying things. Like, they can kind of make Thorns damage not feel so great, because you can't get your minions to aggro on the guy that's creating the barriers on the other enemies. So, in that moment, if you have an enemy that's creating a barrier for the rest of, or basically shielding the rest of the enemies, it's just going to be a little bit of a longer journey. It can be more irritating than you want it to be. But you'll notice, like, the survivability of the Skeletal Warriors and the Golem is huge, but Skeletal Mages, they'll start dipping down if you don't start consuming corpses because they're taking their own life force in order to attack. But thankfully, at an 86, we're versus, like, what, 145 right now on the enemy scale. And we're pretty much just walking straight through casually. There's a few times here and there where it's like my life seems to be the one in danger. But beyond that, it's just no worries. So we'll get the Golem to come in, aggro everything, curse it all. Start noticing everything. Land of the Dead again. Just kind of walk around the edge. Make sure that we kind of keep our survivability at a maximum. We will need to come around the corner, get the aggro with all the enemies, and then start consuming corpses. Laying that down. We have another one of those shield barrier guys, which is really frustrating. I can't stand it, especially when it's on elites. It really does become a bit of a problem. But thankfully, hopefully, we'll be able to get this guy down pretty quickly. Let's get the aggro over here. Boom, there's the barrier gone. He's getting aggro right now. No, Scorpion's coming from me now. Let's hope he can take aggro on the other one again. We're waiting for him to attack. Let's get the aggro pulled in again. Scorpion just struck him, and now we're just waiting on the one guy that doesn't attack. It's efficient. It may not be the most efficient, may not be the quickest in higher tier dungeons. If I had a bit more of the Thorns, it'd probably be a bit faster. But that's something that we can change in the future. But thankfully, for right now, it is doing every bit of the work I need it to, and we've only died one time, and that was from me basically running into a death pulse at an 86. If I had more armor right now, you know, even more survivability. Let's make sure he aggroes everything, trying to avoid all these death pulses. Inside of this last room, that's going to be a nightmare for us. Oh god. I'm going to have to like move around quite a bit. I don't know why they decided to basically make a kill box inside of the last vault little dungeon part. It's really frustrating with modifiers like this. Like, I feel like they should have made different modifiers for the vaults themselves. That would have been probably something that would have went over a whole lot better if they had like trap modifiers, maybe some substantially more damage with the traps, so you'd actually want to avoid them rather than just avoiding them to possibly, you know, not lose moats. But at the same time, that would be irritating with the last room as well. I don't know. All in all, the last room, in my opinion, is just really irritating. And I'm not a big fan of it. I like the rewards from vaults, but I just hate this last room. I feel like, you know, I'd rather have a boss with traps instead of just a massive influx of crazy amounts of enemies that basically clouds all my visibility, like right now. Alright, oh god. Ooh. You know, I don't know if Death Pulse hit me, I don't know if the traps hit me, you know, there's just so much going on here that it's hard to see what's happening. Like, trying to even watch where the traps are right now is unbelievably aggro. And then I've got to aggro everything onto the golem. I'm trying to consume corpses at the same time. I'm getting slowed. I'm getting hell. Oh god, it's a nightmare. Like, there's just so many things going on, and Death Pulse is just making this substantially harder. Quite literally, if Death Pulse wasn't a part of this, I can sit in the middle and not have to worry about anything. Like, let me sit in a location. I can't because of the Death Pulse. I just died to myself, not being moving. Like, Death Pulse is the reason I'm dying at this last portion. I've had so many times with an 86 where I've just stood in a location where there wasn't a trap, and I'm just spawning in minions all around me. I'm gonna have to just basically stand at a distance and try to avoid all of the friendly fire that can possibly happen from me just killing things. So I'm about to have him aggro everything. He's gonna start melting. I'm getting hit by poison right now. I'm gonna have to blood mist. It's really aggro. You know, poison, even at 70% increase, somehow I'm still taking massive amounts. I'm trying to get him to aggro everything right now. I'm trying to curse, trying to just, you know, there's a wall. You know, it's lovely, man. Like, these last vault areas are so lovely. I love it. I love it. It's such a good time. You know, I love being stuck in a box with everything deadly and just being dogpiled with enemies to the point where I'm just, you know, basically at the mercy of, oh, I'm gonna die to this thing because I'm just chained to it. Oh my god, man. That's ridiculous. I even beat it. That is so dumb. Do I have to run that again? Or is that me completed right there? Like, it better be me completed. That's ridiculous, man. I didn't even... I survived the whole thing, and then out of the blue, like, they'd randomly just drop in one of those things that hell chains you. That's so... Oh, God, it's just irritating, man. Like, this is... They could have done a better job. They really could have. Like, I love this portion where it's like, man, it's raining loot. But I hate that room so much. It's just poor design. I'm just gonna say it right there. It's just poor design. That would have been much better if they had made that more spacious, just like Path of Exile, the end of a labyrinth, with the boss fight, where there's some traps in there. You've got a multitude of traps that are interchanging. They could have made different bosses. They could have reskinned bosses for this. They could have reskinned Malphus in 4 to 5 different ways, and just brought him in with different mechanics as a stationary boss unit. And I probably would have enjoyed that more. But guys, that's going to be it right there. That's play footage. I mean, it survives in 86. I need a little bit more survivability to make it through some of the higher tiers. I can guarantee that the minions survive in 90s. One of the biggest things is just my own survivability, and if I could increase my thorns, it would make it a much easier experience. But that's it right there, guys. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. Hopefully this is a minion build that you're really going to enjoy. You know, I know there's a lot of people out there that wanted to play with minions on Necro, and I feel like right now is the best time to get it done. You can go through all of the end-game content besides Uber Lilith, and with a few changes, I imagine you could even get Uber Lilith done with the minions themselves, as long as you could be the one to be able to kill those blood blisters. But with Thorns, I mean, it's just knocking it out of the park. It's a good time. It's an efficient and fun build. Sometimes it may be a bit slower because some enemies don't attack, but at the same time, if you're really craving that minion build, this is definitely probably one of the best in slots for you. But if you'd like to see more of this content, hit that link or hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to see some of this content live, hit that link down in the description below. We've got plenty more of this Diablo content coming in the future for multiple seasons coming up. Even though here coming up on February 8th, I will be all deep diving into Helldivers. I do have a couple more builds I'd like to play around with the Necro before I move on to that game. And so there will be a couple more builds coming in the future, and possibly some for the Sorcerer. But we'll see that here in the coming future. But on that note, hopefully you enjoyed, and have a good one.